So it's important to recognize that the Articles of Confederation does not just name a category and say, look, we're the government now for this nation, or we're the government now of this country, this territorial landmass on the eastern coast of North America. But the articles, it's important to note, as you can see down here on the little picture of them, names each state individually. Now, that may not seem like a big deal, but those were the governments at the time. It wasn't just one government, it was 13 separate, independent, sovereign political units that were named. And they could each make their own laws, they could each create their own taxes, they could each enforce their own laws within their own borders. And whether or not we're saying those are good things, or whether or not we're saying that the states did good things versus things that we don't agree with, or whatever the case may be with that, that was the fact, was that when they declared independence, they were 13 different governments, not one. And so that is key to get as we move on toward the Constitution, and recognize that the government of the Articles being proposed couldn't just say, we now say that this one government is in charge of all the 13 states. Rather, all the 13 states are recognized as joining together in this confederation, team, league, or alliance. It was not that a majority of the states could compel the minority of states. It wasn't that the big states could compel the little states. It was that each individual state had to decide whether or not to join in this union. And so there was not one government during this time. If the articles were accepted, which they eventually were, this is how it would work. I say it's 13 plus 1. 13 governments of the states, independent, sovereign, free governments of the states, plus one government brought together to serve the states. The government of the Confederation is meant to be the servant of the states, not the master. It has a delegated authority. It has an authority given to it, granted to it by the states. And I bring this up quite often, and this may be brought up again later on in this course, that as a teacher, if I allow like a student who's a teacher's aide, I say, hey, I'm going to give you the ability to grade this quiz for me. Here's the answer key. Here's the quizzes. Go through them, please, and grade them. Now, the ultimate authority of grading the quiz and the responsibility belongs to me. However, I have delegated an aspect of that authority for my convenience to someone else. I'm still in charge, but I've decided that it would be more convenient, it would be more worth my time to have someone else manage something for me. It's as if you've hired someone to do something for you. The government of the Confederation is the hireling of the states. And so my student who's grading for me, being a teacher's aide, cannot all of a sudden take over the class, start giving a test, start teaching, telling me what to do. There would be a misunderstanding if that was attempted of the authority that is possessed just by grading those tests. That is what's called a delegated authority. The authority is given, but it still belongs to the original possessor. And that's how it worked with the states. If the states could give the authority to join into a confederation in the first place, they are still the possessors of the authority. Now, this also sets up for understanding the Constitution as well. And so they confederate for the sake of their interests together, created that union for those purposes. And that's why it's important to note that the states are all named individually. Eventually, this is what the Treaty of Paris, the official document that ends the American Revolution, that recognizes the claim of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence said that these states are and of right ought to be free and independent states. They have moved from the status of British colonies to independent states and now declare their separation from another state that would compel them by its laws, taxes, or whatever another government. It now recognized no higher authority. And in this peace treaty, it didn't just recognize the quote unquote United States, capital U, capital S. It recognized the states were united, but in their war against Britain, but all 13 of them had declared independence. 13 declarations of independence. They weren't just the Americans, it was the Rhode Islanders, the New Englanders, the Virginians. I know New England is a region, but that's how they would have been understood a lot at the time. Connecticut, little Rhode Island, all these states are independent and now have the status of Britain, France, Germany, Spain. And so the Treaty of Paris said His Britannic Majesty, this is King George, acknowledges that the United States, these New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, and Providence Plantation, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia to be free, sovereign, and independent states, free from the coercion of other states. They are the highest authority. Sovereign, meaning they have ultimate authority of government within their territorial region, within their borders. Independent, meaning they do not have to ask for permission to exist or operate as governments from a higher government. So that's the idea of governmental sovereignty in the political sense. It says that he treats them as such, and for himself, his heirs and successors, relinquishes all claims to the government, propriety, and territorial rights of the same and every part thereof. So there's a relinquishment of the claim of ownership of the colonies by Britain forever. And so the states, free, sovereign, independent, and 13 governments, not one. So this is key to recognize that the claims of the Declaration are finally recognized, and the states, while they could have remained unconfederated, do join together to be a confederation. They're not one nation. They're not one government. They're not one national political unit. It's not the American Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible. They are 13 different governments on a team. Now, a lot of people may be upset by that, but this is very common. There are all kinds of confederations that make that possible. And this was, in a sense, what the Constitution was as well, although the Constitution would grant more powers to a national government that would start to grow larger, and the tail would kind of start to wag the dog, as it were, that it becomes the focal point of governmental authority. And so it becomes difficult to tell which one is the ultimate authority in terms of reality, but also in terms legally. So anyway, these 13 states being named individually sets up for the expectations of the limits of the government of the Articles of Confederation, but also for the future Constitution